Hello YouTube, this is Let's Talk Horror and welcome back to another video. Okay guys, so with Welcome to Derry coming out later this month, I thought it would be a good time to jump on here and give my reviews for all three on-screen adaptations of Stephen King's 1986 classic novel, It. And that's what I'm going to do today, and obviously we are going to start with the 1990 miniseries, even though Welcome to Derry, is an expansion of the Muschietti adaptation. I'm still going to review the It 1990 miniseries today just because it makes sense and because honestly, guys, it's one of the most important horror movies of my childhood and of, by extension, my life. Here we go. Let's talk about It 1990. As I said, I was one of those kids that saw this at a very young age and was traumatized by it. I had a fear of clowns for much of my childhood into my teenage years because of this movie. Absolutely. And especially the Georgie scene, seeing it at a young age definitely traumatized me. But now I can look back at this as an adult, have some nostalgia for it. That's what we're going to do today, and we'll see if it holds up. With that, let's get into the synopsis, and then I'll get on with the review. So in case for some reason you don't know, here is what It 1990 is about. In 1960, 7 preteen outcasts fight an evil demon that poses as a child-killing clown. 30 years later, they reunite to stop the demon once and for all when it returns to their hometown. Okay, but before we fully get into the review, guys, I just wanted to urge people that if you haven't already, please go do yourself a favor and read Stephen King's original book, It, from 1986. I said that in a community post, and I'll say it again here. It is an absolute masterpiece of a book. I mean, there is a reason why it is King's most famous work. Again, it is a masterpiece. I know it's long. That's actually one of the complaints about the book. But still, man, it's worth your time. It's a masterfully told coming-of-age story, and you would be doing yourselves a favor by reading it. But with that, let's get into the review of It 1990 with my positives for the miniseries. But okay, guys, let's dive right into it. And of course, the one thing that everyone remembers, the one thing that everyone carries with them, the one thing that traumatized everyone as a kid who grew up watching this was, of course, Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise, and that is still a major, major positive of this miniseries. I think Curry's performance, even to this day, even just watching it in 2025, is fantastic. We see all different sides of the character of Pennywise, and he plays it perfectly. And, we see all the shades of that character in the scene with Georgie. First of all, though, I just want to say, I think they really got the look right. And I'll dive into this a little bit more with my review of Andy Muschietti's adaptations of It. I do prefer this look of Pennywise to the Andy Muschietti version. And simply put, it's because he looks like a real clown. They kept it very simple. This looks like a real clown that I would see if I went to a circus or a carnival or to someone's birthday party. This looks like a clown that I could see out in everyday life. It looks real. It looks like a real, normal, everyday, modern clown. And I think that's why it stuck with me so much as a kid. And to be honest, I don't know if the Bill Skarsgård version of Pennywise would have stuck with me as much, just because, this looks like a real clown. They kept it very simple, but very effective. And I think that's why it traumatized so many kids, because this felt like a clown. This looked like a clown that you would see out just in everyday life. But to go off of that even more, Tim Curry's Pennywise is very memorable. The performance is very strong. We see it in that scene with Georgie where he's in the sewer and you as an audience member, and of course Georgie is just flabbergasted, like, what is this clown doing in the sewer? But he seems so friendly and outgoing in the beginning of the conversation. He seems like he couldn't hurt a fly, very outgoing, very friendly, everything you'd want in a clown. And then as that conversation continues, you see the mask flip. You see the monster come out. Part of the conversation that is so scary is when Georgie's like, do they float? And you just see Pennywise, oh yes, they float. And that mask starts to slip. It's just utterly terrifying. And then finally he grabs the arm and we see the monstrous Pennywise. So just in that scene alone, it's so tense and so effective because we see the act he likes to put up to lure kids in, and then we just see the mask slip and the monster beneath, and Curry pulls it off all perfectly. Later on in the miniseries, and especially in the second half, we see a little bit more of the comedic side of Tim Curry. We see a little bit more of the comedic side of the character with Richie in the library and the whole kiss me fat boy scene. So yeah, we see all sides of this character. We see the angry Pennywise. We see the Pennywise that is trying to act like a clown, and then the super comedic Pennywise, and Curry pulls it off all perfectly. And there's a reason why this, performance terrified people for decades, and terrified me and caused me to have a fear of clowns for decades, because Tim Curry pulls it off perfectly. And he really, that alone is just a huge positive of this miniseries. And then to go off of that, I think The Losers Club is pretty well done here. I think it's very well cast. It's pretty well acted here. I know the acting at points in this miniseries takes a lot of heat, like in the Georgie scene or at different points. But overall, I think the seven kid actors especially did their jobs. I like the chemistry between the cast. We get to see a very young Seth Green here, and I think he knocks the role of Richie Tozier out of the park. I think the highlight of the child actors in The Losers Club is Jonathan Brandis. I think he does a very good job playing Bill here, and especially with that help me scene down in the Barrens. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. I think he knocks it out of the park there. And overall, yeah, I think The Losers Club is very well portrayed here. I think the child actors especially do a great job, bringing those characters to life, and I think they have great chemistry. And sometimes I don't think they get credit for that. The adult casting, I think, was on point. And, watching the adult portion of this story, you all felt that it was very realistic that those kids would have grown up to be these adults. And we get some star power with Harry Anderson and, of course, John Ritter. Richard Thomas as Bill. I know people like to make fun of the ponytail and kind of wonder about that choice, but I think he does a great job as Bill. I firmly believe that the Jonathan Brandis Bill Denborough would have grown up to be the Richard Thomas Bill Denborough, and I think they all do a fantastic job. So I do like the casting. I do like the performances of both the children and the adult actors. And yeah, I think they did a good job of making this club, and this group of people to fight Pennywise. I think they do a good job of making it likable and making you root for these people. So yeah, The Losers Club is pretty well done here as well. But the big question I had is, do the moments that I remembered as a kid, that terrified me as a kid, that stuck with me as a kid, watching them all these years later, watching them as an adult in 2025, are they going to hold up? And I am happy to say that yes, many of them do. Many of those moments that stuck with me as a kid do hold up. Of course, the Georgie scene. Yes, it ends kind of on a cheesy note with the kind of zoom into Pennywise with his fangs out, but that scene, it's so tense, it's so uncomfortable. You can tell as a viewer something is wrong, and Tim Curry's performance really helps it. It's a great scene. It holds up for the most part. The shower scene with Eddie and Pennywise, that holds up as well. It holds up for the most part. We get some pretty outdated claymation effects, but the scene where, all the knobs are turning and the shower heads are moving in and out and blocking his way, I think it's pretty creepy. I think it holds up. The Beverly scene with the blood coming out of the drain and her first altercation with Pennywise, I think that holds up perfectly. That's still a very unsettling, creepy, unnerving scene that kind of gets under my skin as an adult, quite frankly. So yeah, a lot of the scenes that I remembered that really stuck with me as a kid hold up pretty well. The scene with Bill and Georgie's picture in Georgie's bedroom, that scene still is very creepy, very unsettling as well. Some may consider it cheesy, but I think it holds up pretty well. So a lot of the iconic scenes, a lot of the scenes that people have brought with them and talk about, they still hold up. Now, if you notice, all these scenes, most of these scenes happen during during the portion of the miniseries focusing on the Losers Club as children, which we'll get into in maybe a little bit of my negatives. But yeah, for the most part, a lot of the scenes that I was terrified of, and now I can say stuck with me as a kid, they hold up for the most part pretty well. So that's always good. And that's another positive I can take from this miniseries. And then I wanted to bring this up because I feel like this always doesn't get the attention it deserves, but the music for this miniseries is absolutely fantastic. It always stuck with me. It definitely adds a lot to the mood and atmosphere of this miniseries. Richard Bellis did the music for this. I guess he's pretty well respected as far as TV projects go, and he knocked it out of the park with this, man. From the main theme we get that plays over the main credits to open the miniseries, or whenever Pennywise shows up and we get that really sinister kind of clownish music, it really stuck with me and adds a lot to this miniseries and definitely helps with the atmosphere again. The main theme of this that plays throughout it at points is so beautiful but so haunting at the same time, and I just think Richard Bellis did a great job with the music here. I feel like it doesn't always get the recognition and the attention it deserves, so the music is fantastic. It's yet another thing that adds to this miniseries and really helps it. It really stuck with me as a kid. So again, the music, fantastic. So now it's time to talk about some of my negatives, and the big one here is watching this in 2025. It's very easy to see how limited and how dated this miniseries has become over the years, and really it's not much to the fault of Tommy Lee Wallace and the people involved in this miniseries. I mean, they were very limited. This is a very dark, violent Stephen King story that had to be treated with clown gloves because it was a made-for-television production. And yes, they had a lot of resources at the time. I think the budget for this entire thing was like $12 million, which in 1990, that was a huge budget for a television production, but it was still a television production, and they had to censor a lot of it. They couldn't show a lot of the violence of the story. They obviously couldn't have a lot of harsh language or anything like that. And it is dated in quite a few areas. For me personally, there's quite a bit of the children's part of the miniseries that holds up quite well. But when we get to the adult portion of the story, again, it has dated quite a bit. And of course, even then, a lot of the children's part has dated quite a bit as well. So it is what it is. This miniseries is dated quite significantly to the point to where I can completely understand if you're watching this for the first time in 2025 just to know what all the hubbub is about, you probably wouldn't get it. For me, the nostalgia holds up. I understand I'm viewing it through kind of nostalgia glasses, rose-colored glasses, but I had to get that out of the way. It is a lot of the effects and just overall, it is quite aged. And there is a made-for-TV charm to it that kind of stands out still, but it's also very dated. And it's, you could tell they had to treat this with clown gloves because it was a television production. And in the year 2025, that does stand out. We have to be honest about that. But getting past how dated the miniseries can feel at points, the other thing is simply, and I felt this way even as a kid, once we get to the second half of the miniseries where it's focusing on the Losers Club returning to Derry as adults, the miniseries just runs out of gas. There are not nearly as many memorable moments. There are not nearly as many memorable scares. The only really terrifying scene that stuck out to me in this portion of the story was the Chinese restaurant scene with the fortune cookies. That is the only scene that really stuck out to me and got to me as a kid. But the rest of them, the adult Losers Club's interactions with Pennywise, they don't stand out nearly as much. In the second half of the miniseries, it really feels like they're trying to show the more comedic side of Pennywise. That's cool to see, but again, it's not as memorable, it's not as frightening, and it just feels like it runs out of steam. Even though I think the Losers Club is very well cast, the pacing kind of drags on. It's just not as scary. It never stood out to me as much as a kid, and there are definitely some silly points to it. The Kiss Me Fat Boy scene, the library scene. Again, intentionally, like they're intentionally trying to show off Pennywise's comedic side, but it just didn't land with me as much as a kid, and it doesn't land with me as much as an adult. So yeah, the adult portion of the story is definitely lacking. And then we get to the finale and the reveal that Pennywise this entire time has just been a giant spider. It doesn't help that the effects there haven't aged well, but yeah, it doesn't land all that well. And then even the end of the miniseries in general, where it's focusing on this character Audra, who is barely a part of the rest of the story. The last shot we see is coming out of her trance. So the last thing we're meant to care about is this character that we barely got to know to begin with. And don't get me wrong, Olivia Hussey does a great job in the role for what she's given. To end focusing on that character was an odd choice. So overall, yeah, the adult portion of the story, the second half of the miniseries, is definitely lacking in many areas and is not nearly as strong as the first half of the miniseries. And I felt that way even as a kid. But even though it's very dated, guys, and once we shift to the Losers Club as adults, it's definitely lacking a bit. This miniseries is very important to me as a person and to me as a horror fan. Tim Curry's Pennywise absolutely scared me and traumatized me as a kid. There's so much that, was nightmare fuel for me as a kid. And of course, at the time that was traumatizing, but now I look back on it kind of nostalgically in a way and can look back on this miniseries nostalgically in a way. And overall, I still think it's a fairly strong, in fact, pretty strong adaptation of Stephen King's 1986 classic. So yes, know what you're getting into, know that it's pretty dated, but overall, to me, I'll always cherish this one a bit. It'll always have a special place in my heart as a horror fan. And I'm going to give it 1990. Let's give it a 7.5 out of 10. That feels about right. A 7.5 out of 10. It's flawed, it's dated, it loses steam as it goes on, but still, it's a pretty solid adaptation of Stephen King's 1986 classic book. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. Comment below and let me know your thoughts on the 1990 miniseries, It, and does it hold up for you? Do you love this movie? Do you have a lot of nostalgia for this movie like I do? Or do you absolutely hate this movie? Maybe you didn't see it young enough. Comment below and let me know, and I will see you guys later. Okay, take care.